I'm going to try to expose some of the information to you about the problems related to the reproductive system of the female. At times it can be rather complicated, but it's basically very simple to keep the system healthy, and that's to keep the waste out and keep the impurities coming in. But if you're taking the waste in, then the waste comes out, and an orifice or outlet for waste in the female system is the uterus. A lot of waste comes out through it, and it irritates the uterus, irritates the fiber, irritates the tissue around it, the tissue in it, the muscular structure in it, and this irritation causes inflammation, it causes pain, it causes the infertility. So we have to look at that and see ways to prevent the loss of the uterus and the attack on the womb, which is basically occurring amongst African women and women in general. It's basically an attack on their reproductive system, a form of population control, the same as with the prostate and the uterus. It's just a way of controlling the population that may be viewed as somewhat fertile. Now, this is what we commonly hear about. We hear about a total hysterectomy. And hyster is referring to old name for uterus. When a lady's uterus was not in cycle, it was out of orbit, they call it hysterical, because it was out of its orbit. And that's where you get the term hysterical from. A total hysterectomy, the uterus, this is the uterus, is removed, the cervix, the opening of the uterus is removed together, and they cut these supporting ligaments off. These are the muscles that hold the uterus in place. They are severed too. And the only thing that's left after a total hysterectomy is the fallopian tube here, with the fimbriated fibers here, what you call the hand, and the ovaries. That's all that's left. And it usually doesn't solve any problems whatsoever to remove the uterus, because they find that the ladies still have the same problems that they had before the uterus was removed. It's basically a hormonal imbalance. So balancing the hormones may change the problem. But if that doesn't work, with the female system, the pain is usually distributed away from the organ together. It's distributed in what we call the peripheral. So a lady with problems in the uterus will have pain in a pelvic area, pain just below her navel, which is where the uterus is basically 3 fingers below the navel, and then you get into the uterus. I don't want to get all technical here, but they have pains in a circular form. They have pain in the back. The pain is being referred, as we call it. With pain, the symptoms are referred more in a lady. They're more expansive, whereas in a man, the pain is usually contracted right in that area. Just like a heart attack in a man, would be a crushing blow to the chest, where a lady will experience heartburn, numbness of the leg. See, her symptoms of pain in the left shoulder, her symptoms will be expansive, away from the system altogether, because of the sensitivity of her organ system, of her body. She picks up the signs and symptoms of the pain way out here. Before they get close to the heart, she picks them up way out here in what we call a peripheral. Whereas a man doesn't pick them up till they're right at it because of the nature of the man. It's this what we call the biochemical structure, which you would, in certain terms, let me go over this first, and then I'll show you the difference in the structure. Now, these are the common symptoms of fiber, of something going on wrong in the fiber of the uterus. Some waste is in there. It's irritating or causing the tissue to die, or making inflammation. So these are signs and symptoms of something wrong with the uterus. Depression, dizziness, fatigue, fluid retention, headaches, insomnia. Usually the sleep alters first. If someone's having some problems, their sleeping will be changed first. If someone's depressed or worried, they have problems going to sleep. The sleep gets changed first usually. Irritable bladder, that's a symptom. Irritable bowel syndrome. Understand that the uterus is between the bladder and the bowel, so it can tilt forward or tilt back. If it has like a fibroid or a tumor, it puts extra weight on it. So that weight can be in front and cause the uterus to fall forward against the bladder, or the weight can be in the back and cause the uterus to fall back on the bowels, on the rectum. That's a problem. So the lady can have fluid retention, problems urinating because the uterus has extra weight from the waist, the fibers or cysts causing it to tilt forward. Or she can get constipation, or sometimes she just can't even have a bowel movement because the uterus is tilting back against the rectum. It's not really, and when you're dealing with fibroids or cysts, it's not really the size of it. The Europeans go into the size. When it's 3 inches, this size, that's 3 inches. Or they call it 3 months or 4 months of pregnancy. When the fibroid is that size, they say, let's take it out. But it's not the size, it's the location. If the location of the cysts and tumors is in a position where it shuts the opening of the uterus so that the sperm can't get in, then you're having problems. Or the location of the cysts or tumors blocking the fallopian tube, so the sperm can't get up to the fallopian tube to fertilize the egg. It's the location of the cyst and tumor more so than the size. But the Europeans go with size, and they use it to kind of force the ladies to have hysterectomies. So you have the irritable bowel syndrome, the muscular jerking. Remember, it's trapped in the fibers, and the fibers trying to contract and expand. And when they're doing that, it doesn't have that fluid flow that it normally has when there's no waste in it. So it gets a jerking kind of contraction there. And that's why you have muscular jerking. And as I said before, the jerking will happen far away from the area, peripheral, before it goes to the area, which she picks up the symptoms, the jerking action in muscles further away because of what we call the chain effect, the domino effect. Poor memory, premenstrual syndrome, which is a collection of diseases that the Europeans call a syndrome. Restless leg syndrome, that's the nervous system. You find it a lot in children that have hyperactivity. Their nervous system is irritated or damaged or some kind of way chemically compromised, so they can't carry a full message, nerve load. So the nervous system can't carry a full nerve load, so you get this restless leg syndrome, crossing the leg, always wiggling the leg, all the things that you see when someone has restless leg syndrome. You'll see a lot of men and women that cross their leg and they just seem to wiggle their foot endlessly. I'm looking at a disease and you're looking at the sociability here. Tingling sensation, that's because the nerves are irritated, you see, and it's not able to carry a full message. So when the nerve's trying to get what we call a mo, which is a conduct frequency, where you have an ohm, which is resistance of frequency. I don't get too technical here. You get this kind of action here because it can't carry the flow. So it jerks because the waste is in the nervous system. So those are some of the signs and symptoms of uterus problems. As you can see, the areas that we mentioned before, the legs, the pelvic girdle, high up in the shoulder. Why is that there? That is related to the large and small intestines. We're down in this part of the body. That's understanding how the body originated. And as I mentioned, these tubes are related. The two kidneys, the two glands are related to the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, the complementary pairs as we call it. Now, then all this kind of understanding was given to us long ago in ancient books that are 3,000-4,000 years old. It's not very difficult. It was written in ancient books. One is the Ibris Papyrus, which has the writings of Imhotep in it mostly. It was called Aesculapius by the Greeks. And in the Hippocratic Oath, they say, I swear by Apollo the physician and Aesculapius and health and all heal. Aesculapius is the man, a black man, that all Europeans must give praises to and swear to before they can become a doctor. But he's responsible for a compendium, which is a collection of medical books written by many different doctors. Some are female, some are male. And that's in his book called the Ibris Papyrus. Then we have the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which means textbook. Because the Europeans don't call their books trees because they're made from trees. So we shouldn't call our books papyrus because it's made from papyrus. They are books. They are textbooks. The Edwin Smith textbook and the Cahoon medical textbook, named after the Europeans who stole them. And then there with Smith Papyrus, or textbook, we have surgical procedures explained, and then we have the actual evidence of successful brain surgery, healing of wounds, of skull injury, successful operation, and the evidence of it right here on these 2,000-year-old and 3,000-year-old skulls of mummies. When you're dealing with this system, the female reproductive system, whatever we try to do, we have to trigger the melanin. Without the melanin's participation in the healing process, there is no process. So with all remedies, we have to use some herb to stimulate the melanin production. That's automatically included in any remedy that an African person takes. So we would use a ginkgo, a gotu-kola. These are two different herbs. Some use a rosemary to help stimulate the melanin production. In children, I use St. John's wort, particularly if they have hyperactive or some kind of letter disease, LDD or whatever. I use a St. John's wort to help increase the blood flow to the pineal gland and trigger the melanin and get it involved in the healing process so the healing will hold. This is what is anatomically referred to as the third eye, or eye of Haru. This centers above the pineal gland. It floats in the third ventricle. These little bubbles here you see are brain cells. They're blown up about the size of a car. And this is the anatomical third eye. It looks like the galaxy, but it is not. It's interesting. It has an orbit. It has particles in it that move, and every time something, a star or planet moves, one of these particles in this moves. I don't know which moves first. I'm not all of that grounded in the science of understanding that. But it's a transducer of the cosmic or galaxy. Now, to treat any illness, be it ovarian cysts or fibroid tumors or prostate-related diseases, we have to understand that we are treating a whole system. We're treating a system that's interrelated, very easily interrelated. Now, we can go from the third eye, which some people call the pineal gland, or we can go from the crown or any of the organ sections here. We have the third eye, the crown, the throat chakra, or melanin center or melanin cluster, which the Hindus call chakras. We have the throat chakra, the heart, the solar plex. We have the genital and the perineum area. And each one of these areas are related to a gland. We have the pineal gland, pituitary, thyroid, thymus, adrenal gland, and liver, which is a gland, and the ovaries and testicles, which functions as a gland, and the uterus functions as a gland and a muscle, as well as the prostate, which is a combination of a gland and a muscle. And each gland produces a particular color, as you can see on this chart, and each gland vibrates to a particular note and to a particular number and letter. Each gland produces a particular taste. A problem with sugar will be a problem with the pancreas, because the pancreas produces sweet. A problem with sour is related to the liver. A person eating a lot of sour, sweet and sour, is obviously having some liver problems and pancreas problems. Or someone has a taste and always likes something sour, always likes something bitter or pungent. Someone likes something pungent all the time. With pungent foods are like garlic, onions, ginger. That's pungent. So that points to the organ that is involved. Pungent taste is associated with the large intestines and lungs. Salty taste is associated with the kidneys and sex organs. Now, how did this occur? Is because the system works on what we call a negative drive, or as Africans would call it, a male and female principle. But in European science, the negative drive is of course, the woman. They associate a lot of negative things with women in European science. So women created the original sin, and it goes on and on with all that negative things there. But we can treat the organs with colors, or we can identify the plant that's good for the organs by color. So you say Oh, let me see. The liver. The liver is associated with yellows. Sure enough, dandelion is good for the liver. Sure enough, golden seal produces a little yellow. It's good for the liver. The colors will lead you to the right herb, even if you don't know the so-called biochemical or nutrient breakdown. And if you're good at tuning forks come in all of these different notes. I have all of these sets of tuning forks, and the plants will vibrate to the note that they hold. Everything in harmony wants to stay and maintain harmony, so it vibrates to frequencies that are harmonic to it. And then we can get to a zodiac breakdown of the organ system. The eyes are Aries, and the music note is D flat, and the color is red, and the zodiac house is 1. And we can treat organ systems based on looking in the person's eyes and looking for where the vein is. If the vein is in the house, then that's related to that organ. There are various ways to treat the system, or you can use the melanin gas or electromagnetic cloud, which they call the aura, so they won't have to use the word melanin, so you won't know what's going on. The problem is that we're back to things that are anti-melanin, which means they're against the reproduction of black, the reproducing of your own kind. And anti-melanin substances are usually synthetic. In fact, in 99% of the cases, they are synthetic. And there we have a table full of synthetics that are put in the mouth, and people call them food. Now, these synthetics are based around the worshiping and rituals and ceremonies of the European culture. We have here the origin of butter. Why you put butter on bread comes from the fact that Europeans put grease on bread to make the bread soft because their teeth were rotted. So they would put the grease on the bread, and they usually pick the grease of a particular animal. If they wanted to have the fierce, ferocious power of a wild boar, they used pig grease. If they wanted to run like a deer, they used deer grease. So they use the grease based on this system of worship, which you're not even attuned to. You just think they're just doing this, but this comes out of their rituals and ceremonies. So they put the grease on the bread to make it soft enough so they could chew it, because their teeth were rotting out because of the nutrient-deprived diet they were on. The acid diet, because all of these foods on this table produce acid. And acid deteriorates your calcium, magnesium, destabilizes your system, causes it to waste away. But acid is also a good stimulus. It stimulates the system because the body says, this is acid, this is harmful to me, let me get rid of it. So the body rushes all this energy to the acid to push it out. So the acid becomes a negative stimulant. The Europeans eat these foods to stimulate their system, to get what we call peripheral circulation, to get a high blood perfusion to the skin and lower layers below the skin, which the African people have the most, and the Europeans have the least. That's why they like to eat meat. Meat is in their nature to produce the urea and the nitrogens and the ammonia and these other chemicals which have a property, especially urea, of boiling when it's cold and freezing when it's hot. That's how they can, that's their air-conditioned system, eating meat. That's their heating system, eating meat, understanding that their normal body temperature is 64 degrees. That's why Africans always freeze around them if they're in the same building. But nonetheless, we have these combinations of food. As you can see from the ritual, the knife is closest to the plate. It's there because they had to protect their food from other predators. The Europeans are classified as a predator species of animals, or people as you call them. So they have the knife in one hand and eat with the other to protect their food supply. Now we have this liquid plastic with insecticides and insecticides and antifreeze in it that you call milk, which is basically cooked pus, because it's made from the blood, and like any blood, when it gets bad, it produces this pus. Now you've just made it into pus by heating it up 200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's why this milk will kill a calf in 7 days, whereas bread will kill a dog in 9 days.
Bread?
Yeah, bleach white flour bread, kill a dog dead in 9 days. You just feed it bread. Yeah. So we have all of these, and of course they put fish liver oil in it to make it vitamin D enriched. But all these things are irritants. They're waste because they're a waste by the fact that they heat them up. Your body would take the mother's milk from the mother, which is at the temperature of the mother's body, and put it into the child's body, which maintains it so it's not cooked. So the child is used to eating raw milk. But once you heat it up beyond the temperature of the mother's body, it's synthetic. That's why the cow's milk will kill a cow once it's pasteurized. It's been made into a waste. The body usually processes its own food. You eat some corn, the liver processes the corn, the stomach, the small intestines, the pancreas, the spleen, the colon, all that's processing the food. So once the body finishes processing the food, the processed food is called a bowel movement. Now we have our irony of it all, that we're eating food that's already processed, so we're essentially eating manure. And that's what causes the problem, is waste in the system. It gets trapped in the cells. It gets trapped in the veins and arteries and causes them to be stiff and lose their flexibility. Once they lose their flexibility, the body tries to find one soft piece of tissue somewhere, and that causes the body rushes all the nutrients it can to use this one piece of soft tissue. And that causes what we call a ballooning out, which you call polyps or diverticuli or cyst and tumor. Simply because we're holding waste into the cellular structure, making it stiff, making it lifeless. And now the body is just forced to use whatever piece is left and tries to do so much with it, it balloons it out. And so now it has one piece of tissue it can use, now it tries to force the waste out through it. Now the body balloons out the tissue, forces the waste out, and once it forces the waste into this balloon tissue, which you call a polyp, so diverticuli or fibroid or tumor or cyst, it irritates that tissue. The tissue gets inflamed. The inflamed tissue is cooked because it's heated up. The cooked tissue rots. The rot tissue gets stiff. Now we're into what we call a bump, fibroid, cyst, tumor, simply because we put the waste in our system because we've been eating waste. Eating synthetics, acetic acid, vinegar, which is bad for the uterus, alcohol, which is bad for the uterus, you see. All these are synthetics. And to make the situation worse, we take synthetic dirt as medicine. Because you can look at an aspirin, look at BC, look at Tylenol, look at it, grind it up. What is it? It is synthetic dirt. The Europeans are specialists at processing things. They used to process us, call it seasoning, whatever. So they processed this dirt and made synthetic dirt, which they call medicine, then feed you bowel movement, which you call food. And then you wonder why your health is deteriorating. So the body is stuck with this kind of operation here of trying to deal with this waste that people are constantly putting in their system. All this is involved with the European rituals and ceremonies, especially with the knife closest to the plate to protect their food supply, especially with the penis-shaped franks or hot dogs, because this comes out of Greek food shapes of food. They shape food to resemble the sex organs. This is the sex organ. Being Christian with an evil spirit, which you call a fork, which is a devil's fork, you're not reading the sexual symbolism and the satanic worshiping here on this plate because you don't know European culture, rituals and ceremonies. You just think white people, but you have to study their rituals and ceremonies just like they study ours. So I just studied them, and I know the whole ritual going here. This is coming out of the Macedonian homosexual cult. It's quite simple. It's play on the paper. Nonetheless, this flowers here, they used to give flowers the shape of the testicles. They call them orchids. So when the Europeans go on a date, they give the woman balls. And they have one ball for each zodiac sign. That's why they give 12 roses. You don't know your European customs, rituals, and ceremonies, so all of this is kind of like, what's the brother talking about? But nonetheless, the chemicals are synthetic. They clog up the system, and they cause addiction. All drugs are addicting. People are addicted to Coca-Cola. You got to detox them off of it. People are addicted to McDonald's burgers because of the hormones in them. People have sex hormone addiction, which causes the external organs and tissue to grow faster than the internal organs, which causes them to crenate. People addicted to sex hormones, like little girls will have breasts at 9. You see, now we're causing the muscles and the bones to grow at a faster rate than the internal organs, which cause the internal organs to crenate because so much demand is made on them. This is what you call speeding up the aging process of the cells. And when you speed up the aging process of the cells that fast, the insides are like, of a 20-year-old person is like 40. That's how you get into these children that drop dead in the cradle, which you call sudden infant crib death. That is death from aging. The child is so old inside that it dropped dead. The diet that the child is fed is too rich for it. It's drinking milk, it's eating food. It doesn't have the enzymes to break down meat until it's over 8 years of age. It doesn't have sucrase, which is the enzyme used to break down sucrose, because humans don't make that enzyme, and you're feeding it white sugar, which becomes an irritant. Aside from the fact it's made out of pork, which is another subject. Nonetheless, the end result of eating all these toxins is that the people end up in the hospital, cannot breathe on their own because they have so much waste in their lungs, and they're given the same diet that put them there in the first place. There it is, the IV, sugar and water. Now, the chemicals get trapped in the body, and the body tries to move them out. But all synthetic chemicals, according to Eli Lilly of Lilly Pharmaceutical Cartel, the drug pushers, the legal ones, the chemicals get into the system and block the nerve receptor sites and deteriorate the body's ability to feel good about itself, to feel good about yourself, to feel good about someone that looks like yourself. In other words, feel good about being black and feel good about other people that are black. So you begin to get into a chemically induced form of self-hatred, because the nerve receptor sites are blocked. Now, because of the deterioration of the reproductive system, the amniotic fluid that the child floats in is so toxic and acidic, aside from that it causes the baby to be in an unhealthy condition when it's carried in the womb. Because of the toxic, infested junk food diet of the African man, the sperm is now deteriorated and crippled with waste, and it's very acid. Then you have conception, which produces a child, and the child is born with a birth defect or deformed. Now we have early abortions or partial abortions of children who are so, what they call deformed, or just shouldn't live as they decide. They just decide this already by taking these little x-ray pictures which cause cancer. All mammograms cause cancer, remember that. All x-rays cause cancer. All sonograms cause cancer. All Dopplers cause cancer. This is all in the Government Accounting Office publication. I wrote the number in my book, Nutricize, for those who want to order it. It's free, and they'll list all the medical procedures that cause cancer. In other words, cause tumors, fibroids that destroy the black woman's womb. So we have what we call partial abortions, where they can abort the child up to 7th, 8th, or 9th month. The issue is, if you want to murder a child in that stage of in that trimester, you have to leave the head in the womb, and then you can call it abortion. So what they do is they leave the baby in, grab it by some forceps, which they call pliers. A layman would call them pliers. The medical people call their pliers forceps. So they grab the child with these forceps and yank the child out. Now, the forceps were devised in European rituals and ceremonies because they thought the woman was evil, and the man didn't want to put his hand on her vagina. But we know that he did something to get the child there, but in this ritual, they don't want to touch the vagina. So they take these pliers, clamp the child, and pull the child out of the womb. Then they get the head right to the opening of the uterus, which some people call some people call the cervix. Then they push the scissors, push it into the back of the skull, puncture into the skull, then open up the scissors, which makes a hole. Then they stick a little hose inside of the skull, which is like a hose, like a tube, and it sucks the brain out, and then the skull collapses, and then they pull the baby out. This is called a partial abortion, or late-term abortion. And then they sell the parts. Because they use fetus to make vaccination and inoculation shots, and they also use the organs to tissue for transplants, because African children's skin is the most flexible and it can mate with other tissue more easily than any other race, so they sell a lot of these parts. So what we're trying to do is correct a condition here. Let me show you a healthy uterus. Let me show you how a healthy uterus looks. So we all know what I'm talking about. We're talking about the 3 layers in the uterus itself. Serosus, which is the outer layer. Then we're talking about the muscular layer, which you call fiber, and some people say that's where the tumors are. We call those fibroids because they're inside the fiber. Then we're talking about the endometrium, which is the inner layer of the uterus, which is right here. Sometimes that gets irritated by toxins and waste and gets inflamed, and that's when ladies say they have endometriosis, because the tissue gets inflamed. Now we have the vaginal wall, and of course this is the ovaries, and this is the fallopian tubes. This is a healthy uterus, and the 3 layers of tissue, skin, or germ layers. Now everything is structured this way in nature, especially in the human form itself. You have these 3 layers. So when I'm talking about skin, I would call the serosus the ectoderm. And I would call the muscle layer the mesoderm. And I would call the inside layer the endoderm. I just changed the name so you won't know what I'm talking about. Now, if I'm talking about people, I would call the outside layer the ectomorphic people, which would be the Chinese and the Japanese. The mesomorphic people would be the Africans, and the endomorphic people would be the Europeans. Endomorphic means gut people. They have a lot of gut sounds, grunt sounds. They say, I have a gut reaction. They tell you what type of people they are. I have a gut reaction. I have a gut feeling. And sure enough, they refer to a lot of stomach. They name themselves out after a lot of stomach and eating terms, like Hun. H-U-N means without spirit or without food. So you get the word Hun, H-U-N, hunter, hungrier, hungry. And the tribe, the European tribe called the Huns. See, it's just when you get into understanding, they are endomorphic. They are basically driving on what you call animalism. They're predator people, and they prey on other people's cultures and all that kind of stuff. You should know that by now. If you're a former slave, you would know that. But nonetheless, we have these layers here. Understand that the reproductive system of the female functions basically the same as the male's. The vaginal shaft gets erect. The uterus contracts just like the prostrate contracts and pulsates. Same thing occurs here. Direct, same things. And when the vaginal shaft gets erect, the uterus tilts forward, slides down the shaft, and makes a cup that collects the sperm so it can go inside of the uterus. It's a process. The vaginal muscles, vagina muscles, start contracting and pulsating. And when they start contracting and pulsating, they start making colors. They start making notes, because anything that's pulsating is a frequency. It's an electromagnetic force. It creates a frequency, and frequencies can be measured, and you call those notes. You call it music. Like you tune pianos and all instruments based on the vibratory force of the pineal gland, 1,440. You tune all instruments based on A, because that's the vibratory force of the pineal gland, 440. Everything is centered around this melanin issue here, and the pineal is where the melanin is made. So nonetheless, the vagina starts pulsating, making colors, and the penis shaft is in the vagina, and the pulsation goes up the shaft of the penis and starts pulsating back to the prostrate, which tunes the prostrate, puts the prostate on the same frequency of the uterus, which puts the sperm more in harmony with the egg. All this is like a dance, a symphonic dance. We get into the uterus, the fallopian tubes doing a dance, which they call the fertility dance, how the uterus moves around and about, and the Europeans call that a fertility dance, or distort that fertility dance and say it's a hoochie coochie, or the belly dance, which is called the fanning of the flame, the creating of the flame, which is life, from your solar center, where your umbilical cord is attached to your mother's solar center, attached to your solar center, and that's why all African things are based on the solar system. The metric system is a solar-based measurement. The calendar is a solar-based. Everything comes from the solar system. Metra means solar. You attach to the solar system of your mother. You're carried in the solar center of your mother. You follow me? So we get into this whole measurement and calculation based around solar cycles, but when you're into European culture, you're into lunar cycles, moon cycles. Oh, the moonlight's so pretty. Isn't it romantic? Everything is the moon, honeymoon. That's a lunar cycle. We're into a solar cycle. So we got to start getting on the right station to understand our reproductive system. Now that's a healthy uterus and fallopian tubes. Now this is one that has all types of fibroids in it. So you can see it. All types. I have all the types there. I have the pedunculated submucosa fibroid. That's the one that looks like a tree. This one looks like a tree. It has a stalk, it has branches, and it twists and it turns. And when it twists and turns, its roots start clamping harder on the muscles, and that's what causes the pain. When these fibroids start moving on their own, they get the nourishment when the blood comes through in the pulse. Like that. Blood is pulsed through your body. You call it your pulse. That's how it's doing. It's going like that. And it starts pulsing in the tree of the fibroid, and the fibroid starts moving. And when it starts moving, it starts pain in the fiber of the uterus. And that's how you get this pains in the uterus from the pedunculated tumors. Remember, you had this waste. It irritates the fiber. Once the fiber gets irritated, it gets inflamed. Once it gets inflamed, it heats up. Once it heats up, it cooks the flesh. Once it cooks the flesh dies. Once it dies, it creates pus. The body says, I got this dead flesh, I got this pus, let me surround it so it won't contaminate the rest of me. And that's when you get the shell, that's when you get the fibroid, the cyst encased in there. Tissue grows around it, protected. Now, when it grows around it, protected, it also traps veins in there. Now the veins can't get a clear flow of blood in and out, so the veins start ballooning, and so they burst. And that's what we call chocolate. When we used to open them up in the operating room, that you cut them open and it just be brown blood coming out. We call it chocolate then. When I used to do that sort of thing, I was in traditional medicine. Then we have subserous fibroid with fibers into the myometrium. These are the fibers itself. It grows like a tree, and the fibers grow into the fibers of the uterus and the mesoderm. It grows right in there and starts strangling the blood supply to the very section of the uterus, and that section dies. So what we're trying to do is understand that this condition can be corrected by correcting the diet, going back to eating foods in their natural state to keep you in your natural state, going back to using real medicine, herbs, not that synthetic dirt which the Europeans peddle as medicine, the Tylenol, which decreases the blood supply to the pelvic girdle and to the uterus. Aspirin does the same thing. Sedatives cause cysts and tumors. All those neuroleptics cause nerve damage, which stops the correct response between the brain and the body. Neuroleptics, tranquilizers, sedatives. You've heard of them before, Prozac, things of that sort we use today. But nonetheless, we have the firm, hard, calcified fibroid. That's there. And so it's not able to maintain temperature. So it's colder than the rest of the temperature, the rest of the uterus. Now, because it's colder, the uterus doesn't have the right temperature in that area to get the proper blood flow, because the coldness slows down the blood in that area. And that causes tissue to die. So what we're going to do is increase the blood supply to the uterus. Increase it with nourishment, with healthy things. Let me just go over one more example here. I just don't want you to lose track of what I'm talking here. I'm talking about the uterus and the vagina. I was talking about the area here, the muscles that contract and vibrate. Move us up something for you. The muscles that contract here and vibrate. Sometimes the bacteria, fungus, and yeast that live in the uterus and live in the eyes and live all over the body, because you can't function without bacteria and yeast, as you call it, and fungus. This population gets out of control. Sometimes if you feed it too much dead things like white sugar, bleached white flour, then what grows on dead things? Mushrooms, fungus, So the fungus starts growing on this dead stuff. And that fungus-like infection is called a yeast infection. So now you have to get off of all the white sugar, all the bleached white flour, because remember, they were on food anyway. They're processed bowel movements, synthetics. So you have to come off all that synthetic food because you're going to feed the yeast infection. Now you come off the white sugar, the bleached white flour, and walking around and say, what can I eat? I don't have nothing to eat. You can't eat any fermented food, acidic acid, vinegar, any alcohol, any wine, or any beer. They're not food anyway. So now you're stuck with eating food and walk around and say, what can I eat? You can eat food because those things I talked about are synthetics. We have these broad ligaments here. We have the uterus here. Understand that orgasm is not just a sensation derived from the stimulation of the labia minora, labia majora, and clitoris. Orgasm in women occur with the rocking motion of the uterus and of these ligaments, of the pelvic girdle itself. It gets into a rocking motion. And this rocking motion stimulates what we call an orgasm. But the Europeans cut all that out and give you what is called a hysterectomy. It's a money-making thing here. Now I'm going to move on and go to some of the things that are used to treat various conditions of the uterus. The endometriosis, as I mentioned, is treated with burdock and saw palmetto, which is good for the fallopian tubes, by the way, and feverfew, which is used to reduce the temperature. So I'm dropping the temperature of the uterus, which is where you get this endometriosis and itis. All itis means inflammation, tonsillitis, appendicitis, all that means inflammation. So I'm dropping the temperature of the uterus so the nutrients can get in. The white willow is primarily used for pain. That's under endometriosis where I'm at. I'm down to white willow. Comfrey is a herb that has what they call allotonine in it, which is good for healing. So I'm using comfrey. I'm using ginseng. They like Siberian ginseng, but all ginseng basically will do just the same as stabilizing the energy level. And there you have mullein under ginseng, which is good for mucosal membrane, mucous membrane tissue. Helps keep it nourished. Remember, the things that attack the mucous membrane attaches to mucosal tissue all over. That's why antihistamines, cough suppressants, all stop the correct flow of nutrients in and out of the uterus because it stops the suppresses fluids in the uterus. It says it's a cough suppressant. It suppresses mucus flow in the uterus. Now the uterus can't secrete waste out because you have suppressed it with a cough suppressant, an anti-deodorant, whatever you call those things. All those things stop the fluid all over the body, brain, eyes, everywhere. So the person has to come off of those kind of things, the synthetic deodorant, the antiperspirants, the deodorized soap, all these things that keep waste in when your body's trying to throw waste out. That's why we're using the mullein, because that works on the mucosal membrane tissue and helps it to get back its vitality to nourish the system. And primrose primarily is used for what people call the PMS and pain, but actually it stimulates the pineal gland. It's good for the pineal gland, which has to be in the process or the treatment wouldn't hold. If you don't use primrose, then use any herb such as ginkgo or gotu-kola or rosemary or St. John's wort that helps increase the blood supply to the pineal gland and cause the treatment regimen that you're taking to hold. Then we have dung quoit, which is in the angelica family, and red raspberry leaves, which is all-around herb used for women's disorders. It's also good for the prostrate. It's also good for children. It's also good for colds in children. These herbs are not just limited to what I'm saying. They cover a broad spectrum. But red raspberry leaves are used primarily as the all-in-all herb for the female system. It helps lessen the pain of birth. It helps strengthen the uterus. It helps with the milk. Then we get into the supplement, the allotone, which I told you is derived from comfrey, and currans, which has the what you call gamma-lanolinic acid in it. Currans, which is a type of a raisin. And all grapes, especially red grapes, are good for stimulating the pineal gland. And the bioflavonoids, which are used to help stabilize the tissue. Some people use that for hemorrhoids or varicose veins. Lecithin is good for varicose veins too. So is chromium percolinate, by the way. Then we're back to evening primrose capsules and the folic acid, which is good for stimulating the hair, the follicles. And remember, the follicles is nothing more than melanin. So it's good in stimulating the melanin, the follicle. Folic acid, and B6, which helps transmit the nervous messages, because the nervous message between the brain and the reproductive system gets kind of like damaged by junk and irritants and synthetic foods. So now we got to stabilize the nerves. Vitamin B6 is also good for what people call today carpal tunnel syndrome. Calcium and magnesium. That's good for stabilizing the nervous system, stabilizing the protein in the body. Because African people don't require as much protein as Europeans, and we stabilize our protein with vitamin D, vitamin K, calciums, and magnesiums, because calciums come in a complex. Like you have a B complex, you have about 8 different types of calciums. But you can't get all of those in supplements. You can only get those when you eat properly. You get the right calciums. But we're just isolating one calcium and one magnesium here. And zinc, which is good for all infections, colds, flus. It's good for anorexia nervosa, people who just stop eating, who lose their appetite. You can regenerate the appetite by using zinc. And we have kelp, which is used for electrolytes, which is minerals that carry electricity. We call those electrolytes. And they sell a cheap form of electrolytes today. We call it a sodium chloride. They put that in Gatorade and say, you got electrolytes. And then phenylalanine, which is good for suppressing the appetite, is also good for depression. It's also used with hyperactive children as well. And melatonin, which today is used to help stimulate and enhance the melatonin in your body, and it's used for sleeping, and liquid melatonin is sometimes used with hyperactive children. You have to give them a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening to keep them off the Ritalin. And organic iron. The problem with taking synthetic iron is that it's constipated. It's constipating and it constipates. It is in a form that the body cannot use. The minerals have to be wrapped inside of a live tissue of a plant. All minerals are inorganic and the body cannot digest them. So the body can only use the minerals when they're in a colloidal form, as the Europeans call it today, when they're wrapped around a plant or inside of a plant. Chelated, as they say sometimes, meaning that chelate means claw, meaning that it's a plant wrapped around it. The inorganic mineral, which we call enzymes. Enzymes are hormones, hormones are vitamins. They're all the same. It's just when the activity goes this way, we call it enzyme. When the activity goes that way, we call it a hormone. When it goes this way, we call it a vitamin. So a lot of times you get confused in all of these things. But on the science side, the people in the science know. But they just tell the public anything, and y'all go for these things. It's just a change in the behavior that gives us a change of name. Vitamin, hormone, enzyme. Just like if you change your behavior, they call you a thief, they call you an honest person, they call you a nice person. You're the same person, but if you change your behavior, they change your title. It's the same with the nutrients. So don't get all lost with it. Then we have the herbs that are used for premenstrual syndrome. You see the ones for uterine bleeding. We have to stop the bleeding. Usually I use vitamin K straight away. I have to stop the bleeding first before I do anything. And that requires at least 10 of those vitamin K tablets, sometimes 10 a day, sometimes 10 3 times a day. The objective is to stop the bleeding. I rely a lot on vitamin K and Comfrey for that. Comfrey is the herb with the allotonin in it, as I mentioned before, that's used to stop the bleeding. And then you can see the herbs that are used for premenstrual syndrome and menstruation to increase it or decrease it. Some ladies like to bring on cellular hemorrhaging because they were taught that menstruation is necessary. Menstruation is a loss between 3 and 5 tablespoons of blood, between 4 and 6 tablespoons of blood in Europeans. And menstruation consists of those 4 to 6 tablespoons of blood, some cellular debris, and some mucus. It's all mixed together, and it's not all blood. Usually bright red blood is an indication of carbohydrates. Dark red blood is usually indicating fats and protein. Blood with a smell is usually protein. So you can tell by the color of the blood what is going on in the system, whether it's from the pancreas and spleen, or whether it's from the liver, or which organ is involved in this disease process. If it's clotting, then you know that it's being held in the system. It's not coming out in clumps, it's just clots. It stays in one spot and then it comes out. But a lot of times ladies think they pass in clots, but it's clots in one spot, then it passes out. There's just a lot of misconceptions about the reproductive system because it's exploited and people make a lot of money off of it. Hysterectomies, PMS, aspirin, Tylenol, Midol. It's a lot of money to be made off the system. Tampons cause tumors and cysts. And I have the remedies that are commonly used for these illnesses. There's a yeast-like fungus. It's called Candidus albicans. Let me move this over some so you can see it. Those are standard herbs used for that. Portiaco is the main one that's used today for that. It will get rid of the Candidus yeast infection, as it's called, which is actually a fungus infection. Fungus is an indication, of course, of using antibiotics or using a lot of processed carbohydrates. So that's white sugar, bleached white flour. Fungus is also an indication of being hypersex, so just focusing on a lot of sex. That's why you find a lot of fungus infections in men, like athlete's foot or jock itch or jock rot, as they call it. A fungus infection. Now I'm going to move down to the one that involves tumors, since that's the one that's the crisis in the black community with African women. Fibroid tumors. As I mentioned before, it's not the size, it's the location that presents the problem of the fibroids. I usually use a combination of these herbs here: sheep sorrel, burdock, dandelion, red clover, saw palmetto, echinacea, golden seal, chickweed, and I use St. John's wort for the depression that diseases cause. People get very burnt out from concentrating on the disease process. It's very draining to concentrate on the disease. It's very draining to even talk about it. You're just simply talking about your illness can just give birth to those emotions and feelings, and those emotions and feelings can burn you out, drain you of energy. So I use the St. John's wort just to nourish the nervous system. And I use these herbs, actually all of them in combination, not just one, all of them. That's when I'm being very aggressive with the treatment. All of them are used in equal parts, and I add usually a female herb of some sort with that formula to increase the blood supply to the pelvic girdle. That would be a red raspberry or chaste tree berries. I lean more toward chaste tree berries because it's a berry from an African tree, the chaste tree. But I usually use a female herb in combination with all the herbs here to help focus the blood supply to the pelvic girdle. And these supplements are used, zinc in particular, because it has a healing quality, and lecithin and garlic and coenzyme Q10. Vitamin A, which is good for infections, ear infections and all types of infections, along with zinc. And I use also lysine, which is amino acid that's used for infections and herpes and all sorts of kind of diseases of that sort. But the main purpose is to reestablish the healthy environment for the tissue. And that requires changing the diet. I'll show you the herbs that are used for menopause: blessed thistle, false unicorn, squabine. Squaw is the European word for pussy, and they call African women by this name. It's a very degrading name to call African woman, African native, which we call the Cahutis and the Jamases. These are Africans that came over before Columbus, who taught the Native Americans all this dressing and music in the high-rise apartment buildings and the pyramids. These are Africans that came over. So I was saying Africans to be historically correct, but we associate them as Native Americans. They're called Tar Heels, Brass Ankles, Blackfoots. Those are Africans who lived here in America before Columbus, long before the Native Americans, who you call Indians, and taught them a lot of things. The dancing, the drum rhythms, and all these things that we associate with Native Americans are actually African. Just like you associate the Moors who brought this music into Spain that you call Latin. That's African music. The Moors brought it in. But a lot of our things are just taken away from us. Now I'm going back to claim them so we know what we're about and have more strength. So this is a negative term, the squabine, for Native American women. But we still use it because the Europeans control the herb market. Merck controls the vitamin C market. The Japanese control the amino acid market. Squaba, the Dunqua, the black cohosh, the red raspberry, and the chase tree berries is used for menopause. And all those herbs, same herbs I mentioned before, used for hot flashes. But once we reconstitute the system and get it back on a healthy level, then we don't have to worry about this anymore. We get away from eating the synthetic foods, the processed foods, the waste. Because this waste gets in the muscles lose their flexibility, and then we get into a condition known as a prolapsed uterus. That's when the uterus no longer has enough strength in the muscles that suspend it, hold it in place. We have two in the front that attach to the pubic symphysis bone, two that attach in the back to your spinal column, as you call it, the vertebrae, and we have the two on the side that keep the uterus in position. Because the uterus has an orbit, it moves about. But when these muscles get full of waste, they can't move like they should, and the uterus starts slipping down. This was a condition during slavery, just as ulcers and stress-related diseases occurred during slavery as well, which we think all of these things are rather new. Eventually, the uterus falls right out of the vagina because of the waste, due to the diet or the waste that is injected to it by the acid waste in the man's sperm from eating junk food, alcohol, acetic acid, and all sorts of things that are not food. Sometimes you get in-between bleeding, mid-period bleeding. Sometimes it's due to ovarian cysts. This is normal to have that cyst. That's the blood that's lost when the egg comes out of the ovary. That's a little bit of blood. Then you have some blood that's lost when the egg is not fertilized, which is about 3 drops of blood at the most. That is called classical menstruation. That is menstruation. 1-3 drops of blood. That's menstruation, but that's classical menstruation. We have Marden menstruation, which is a combination of hemorrhaging. That's when the endometrial tissue inside the uterus itself loses stability and begins to deteriorate and burst and bleed. And that's what people call menstruation, but that is hemorrhaging. There's a difference between classical menstruation and hemorrhaging, but we lump them all together. But that is not so. Once the diet is changed, then the menstruation or bleeding part of the cycle decreases. A young lady who is bleeding, say menstruating as you call it, between 5 and 7 days is heading toward a cyst or tumor, guaranteed. Especially when they're 12 and 13 and 14 with a period that long, they're heading toward cysts and tumors. If the lady has this cramps and all these signs and symptoms going on that I showed you earlier, where the pain is referring in the pelvic girdle, referring up to the muscles in the neck, which are related to the lower system, the reproductive system. You get pain in the other areas of the body related to the reproductive system. Getting all this referred pain at 13 and 14 and 15, that's the signs and symptoms of a cyst or tumor on its way. The diet alone can indicate that. Red meat especially, dairy products, alcohol. On that kind of diet, eating junk food, heading into a fibroid tumor or cyst. That's why close to 70% of African women have fibroids. It's not a diet for us. We're eating out of our nature into someone else's nature, and we pay the cost of it. That's why 50% of the African men have prostate disease. You've heard of them, Sidney Poitier, Minister Farrakhan, Barry, and it goes on and on, Mayor Barry of Washington, D.C. It's an endless list. And you wonder what's going on. It's because we're eating out of our nature. We have to go back to eating in nature, with nature, natural foods, raw foods, steamed fruits, vegetables. And then we won't have these kind of illnesses going on. I just want to show you a picture of the herbs and how they look. Excuse me. This is how medicine looks. Looks pretty. Looks pretty enough to eat. All these are herbs used to treat the reproductive system of the female, of women. we have birthroot, we have blue cohosh, we have witch hazel, shepherd purse. I use that a lot for bleeding, hemorrhaging, too much bleeding. I use shepherd's purse. And then we have licorice, which is used as an estrogen stimulator. Then we have down at the bottom here, black cohosh. They look pretty. And these are the natural medicine. These are the medicines we want to get back to in order to restore the uterus, so we won't get into these fibroid kind of conditions, these adhesions, where the tissue loses its constitution and the collagen starts gluing the fallopian tubes and the ovaries together. And we call these adhesions. Again, I'm going to show you a disease condition here. Let me raise this up here so you can see it. You can see the fibroid is inside and bulging out. You see another fibroid, which here is blocking the fallopian tube. You see a blocked fallopian tube here with adhesions. The tissue is beginning to grow together. These strings that you see here are tissues that are connecting organs together that don't belong together. That's a symptom of a vitamin C deficiency, which means the African is not getting outside enough. It has a sunlight deficiency, which is not stimulating enough vitamin D, which causes the body to retain vitamin C, which reduces the amount of acid in the system. So this person has a sunlight deficiency and a melanin deficiency, aside from eating junk. Now we're getting into adhesions. And then we're getting into scarring. Remember, vinegar, acetic acid causes scarring. If you get a temperature, then the tissue breaks, and then when it heals, it causes what you call a scab. Then the scab forms a little kind of growth piece of tissue there. That's what we call that a scar inside of the body. In that little area, like if you got cut with a knife and then it heals, you can always point, I got cut with a knife there, you can always point to it. That's what we call scarring when it occurs inside the body. And that causes that area of the tissue to lose its flexibility, lose its ability to carry electrical impulse, a charge. And so it can't carry information. So it blocks information from being received to the healthy tissue. But all this is caused by those synthetic douches, the tampons that had bleach in it and so many chemicals in it that if you ate one of them, it would make you sick. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm saying that all these things that we're not considering, aside from the deodorants, the antiperspirants, the diet, the anti-melanin chemicals, such as aspirin, Tylenol, Prozac, all of these things add up to the destruction of the reproductive system of the black woman, attack on the womb, deterioration of the prostate. And we walk around wondering what's happening when we're actually killing ourselves in a very tasty way. And then we won't have to subject the ladies, won't have to be subjected to these kind of examinations. This is when the finger's inserted into the vagina in order to palpate it, to feel for a lump or sore or hardness. You can palpate the fallopian tubes and ovaries and feel whether they are too stiff or inflexible or some kind of bonding adhesion is occurring. The lady is put on her back, her feet are put into stirrups like an animal, and she's examined by usually a doctor who knows nothing about rhythm, remembering that the African system is very rhythmic because of the melanin, the high amount of melanin, high amount of rhythmicity. So the lady is subjected to a whole lot of treatment like this and examined by someone who doesn't understand rhythm, can't even dance. Examining a very rhythmic system. This has a solar cycle, a lunar cycle, a celestial cycle. All these different rhythms are going. A 20-day rhythm, a 28-day rhythm, a 33-day rhythm, all these different cycles or frequencies as we call it. In chemistry, we call it the orbit. Like you say, the Earth orbits around the sun. We don't call that an orbit in chemistry. We call that a frequency. I'm switching languages, but what you know is still the basics of what I'm saying. But in science, we switch the language to make you ignorant, so you have to come to me, you see, so I can keep myself in business. But I'm trying to empower you so you know that you understand this. You understand it precisely. You understand if you eat something that's not natural, it's going to make you not natural. I know that we all have to deal with this one little character here that I've mentioned before, this character called an eating disorder. Because we try to change our diet, then we get into these junk foods. We We try to change our diet and stay on the straight and narrow. And we get into the herbs and the vitamins and minerals, and we never treat the addiction, the eating disorder, so we slip. We slip back because we never treated the eating disorder. Eating disorder is a nice way of saying mental illness. You've got to be out of your mind to eat all the time, just as someone's got to be out of their mind to drink all the time. You've got to be out of your mind to smoke all the time. You're out of your mind and in somebody else's mind, which means you're into someone else's nature. It's natural for those people, but it's not natural for us. So we have to treat the eating disorder. We treat that with herbs. Chickweed is good. Red clover is good. Astragalus are good. These are herbs that are used for eating disorders, especially the chickweed and bilberry, which is good for sugar diabetes or sugar cravings. So we use the chickweed and the bilberry. Those are the herbs. The amino acids are used for the eating disorders, phenylalanine and glutamine. Those are good for cravings. Those are the amino acids. The vitamins and minerals are good for it. You have lecithin. You have chromium, picolinate. The picolinate now is very popular. And we have zinc. But we have to understand, if you eat because you're upset, you eat because you're worried, you eat because you're happy, you eat because you're horny, you eat because you haven't had sex, you eat because you want to have sex, you have a problem here. Your eating is being controlled by someone else, by those people that do the commercials. We're going back to the old-time remedies. That's what we need to do. Go back to those old-time remedies, the old way of doing things, so we can be free, nutritionally free, from diseases of all sorts. This, of course, is the latest discovery in medicine. It's the latest one that you find in the health food store. This 3,000-year-old painting of what people call today aloe vera. There it is. This is what African ladies were using to treat their skin and keep their bowels regular. So we're going to go back to these foods, these healthy foods. We don't want to get into the mucus-forming foods that irritate the skin, which causes inflammation. Inflammation causes the skin to rot. The rotting skin gets encased, forms pus. The pus forms bumps. The bumps form cysts and tumors. And we're back into all of this because we're eating food that causes what we call liquid manure, what you call mucus. And a lot of people have so much manure in their system that it comes out in the morning, so we get this liquid manure caked on our teeth, which we call plaque. And it gets all coated on our tongue, which we call plaque. That's liquid manure. Your manure is just backing up through your colon and stomach up to your mouth. And people just brush their teeth in the morning to get rid of the manure. They should really wipe their mouth with toilet paper, because that's what it's full of. So we want to get away from these mucus-forming foods, this meat, the dairy products, the starches, the synthetic sweeteners like sugar, and artificial syrups. Corn syrup is another name for white sugar, by the way. And aspartame is deadly. If you had a choice between aspartame, which you call NutraSweet, and Sweet and Low, take the white sugar. Because the aspartame damages the nervous system, according to the Center of Disease Control right here in this Atlanta place. Another homosexual infested town that I go into, along with Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. But nonetheless, we have these healthy foods we should eat, such as these vegetables, the fruits. I mean, fresh fruits, steam them. That releases the phosphates, which get attached to it when they use synthetic fertilizer. But lightly steam it. Eat your fruits and vegetables raw as possible. Eat dried fruits that don't have sulfur, which damage the nervous system, causes cancer. You want to get away from that. You want to eat melons, sea vegetables because of the electrolytes, natural grains, especially spelt, S-P-E-L-T, and the kamut, and maranthine, and all these natural foods. We want to get back to the way we should be. Understand, if you're going to buy water, buy distilled water. Your body only uses distilled water. Your body does not use mineral water. It does not use spring water. Your body distills all water before it uses it. So buy distilled water. Take the burden off your system. But this is what we want to get back to. We want to get back to nature. So we won't be confronted with fibroid tumors and cysts and all this referred pain anymore, which causes a lot of damage to relationships, because the lady's worried about her fibroids, the brother's worried about whether he's going to have sex, the lady's worried about the pain from sex, the brother's having too much sex anyway, now he knows his system is degenerating because the angle of his erection is pointing down to the ground, which indicates that the reproductive system of the male is degenerating. And each person is degenerating, but no one is taking action. The action to take is to change the diet. The herbs can help you get to a change, but the herbs are not the change. The vitamins will not save you. The herbs will not save you. It's the diet.